Now I've got the pleasure of introducing Carol Schaefer. Carol is an adoption icon. She's the author of The Other Mother in 1991, which is a classic in adoption literature and was adapted into a television movie in 1995. In addition, Carol authored a sequel called Searching for Healing After Reunion. Carol's been featured in the media extensively on Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC, and many, many more. She's a frequent speaker at adoption conferences and has facilitated adoption support groups for over 25 years. Carol, thank you so much for being here this evening. This is one of my dreams come true. Your book was so significant to me as we were just starting out, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. And, I'm really excited to do this. A little nervous, I have to admit, because I haven't done a Zoom talk like this before, but I think it's going to work out just great. As Betsy said, I was involved. I searched for my son when he turned 18 in 1984. So I've been involved with adoption issues for a very, very long time. And it's hard when you go through, when I talk about this idea of how to heal when you can't, it took a long time to figure it out. And a lot of conversations with people and a lot of thinking and a lot of reading, and I hope it's a help. So the major thing, just to boil it down, is I feel that both adoptees and birth parents had to become someone else in order to go on after the separation between the mother and the child. They no longer had access to an essential part of themselves. So part of this is about, how do you get that back? How do you even know it was gone after so long of not having this part of yourself? This was something that really fascinated me, and I worked hard to try to figure it out, and we'll see if I did. But anyway, so birth parents had become, if you can imagine, a mother or a father, and had to deny it. We were all, ensconced in lies pretty much, unless it was something that you really knew you had to do, had support of all your family. I do come from the baby scoop area where I was in a home for unwed mothers and hidden away, and came back out and I was in Florida, right? Instead of in Richmond, Virginia, where I really was, in a maternity home. So all the lies. When we were in the home, we couldn't give our real names. We had to make up a name. We were lied to a lot, and we had to lie a lot. And so that just erodes the soul. And pretty soon I found that I couldn't even find myself anymore before I got out of that home. A lot got lost. And so that's a common experience. I don't need to go into it. You all know about that. But those lies were a huge part of our tragedy. And it makes it difficult to access the healing that we need to have. And adoptees, it's like a mirror. We're mirrors for each other in a lot of ways. They have to adapt to survive without genetic mirrors. Like, they go into a family, they're geared for their mother, they're geared for the genetic DNA that there is going to get fired up once they're born, or maybe even before they're born. And then their mother's not there. Her smell's not there. Her voice isn't there. And they have to switch and just try to survive. And I always think of little babies just learning to smile and, make their parents happy. I'm not saying anything wrong with the parents, but I'm just saying that the adoptive parents didn't always understand that. So there's the mirror of not having any access to your essential self anymore. But the adoptees had to do it to survive. When we have a trauma, which is that what was, you can't say that it was not a trauma to be separated like that, even if you didn't want the pregnancy, even if you didn't want the baby, even if you really wanted the adoption. The deepest part of you is wired for that baby, and there is a trauma no matter what. It's just that maybe you've buried it deeply. It's important to at least pay attention to that. That could be true. So I always talk about it. I think that a lot of therapists call it disassociation. You probably all have heard that term, but I think of it as being frozen in time. Like once this happens, the trauma freezes you. And I used to talk about this, and then now they proved it, that the hormones freeze and they are stuck in time. So this explains why when you have a reunion or you start to think about searching, all of a sudden things come up and they start sometimes like a flood that you didn't expect, and you start to thaw. I like that analogy of being frozen and thawing, because thawing implies that you become more aware of what happened to you gradually, so you can heal better and not get into too great a shock. But never doubt that the separation is a deep trauma to both child and mother, and some fathers. We had to move on. There was no choice, but the body doesn't move on. The body doesn't forget. This is the key to understanding why we have to work on healing the body as well as, well, I'll get to that. Wait a second. Anyway, the body doesn't forget, the painful feelings that are buried become insidious. Over the years, we just have buried all those feelings and we can't even relate to them anymore. We don't even know they're there a lot of times. The result for our population, they have done too many studies that prove that there's a much higher percentage of us that are addicted, have health issues, relationship problems, the gamut across the board. And that made me, when I read that, it made me really pay attention that something so serious was wrong, that you take a normal population and we are much higher as far as having these issues. But trauma, let's see. But the body has taken in all of this information and the feelings, and it protects us and helps us go on by burying them. Let's see, over the years, it's kind of like, okay, you have the initial trauma and there's a little river or a trickle that gets started, and then until the psyche sees suddenly it gets wider and wider, and the psyche begins to see everything is the same. And I'll just use an example. Say you have no trust anymore after having to give up a child. You trust issues are real serious. So and that had to do with the incident, but then along comes maybe a relationship afterwards, and somehow you got betrayed, and then the trust seems bigger. And as it keeps going along like that, let's see, the opening gets wider so that more and more things feel like the same. Like pretty soon you don't trust anybody. Or else it could be shame that you feel originally, and then pretty soon the shame keeps building on each other, because you're not dealing with it. You're not dealing with the original problem or trauma because we weren't supposed to. And very often it's not recognized. So it's there, but you can forget about it and you don't get too much help. So then you wonder why I can't trust anybody, why I feel so much shame, why I feel anger for no reason, especially I would say, well, no, I'd say both adoptees and birth parents, they had probably a lot of anger, if even if it wasn't permitted to, even if you weren't permitted to feel it, it was there. So then pretty soon, other things that are similar start to feed into that wound. And then you start to wonder why you're angry for no reason, or why you're feeling sad with no explanation, or because the source of these feelings, the original feelings, are hidden now from us. To enable us to move on, our bodies took over the unprocessed trauma. It stored the painful memories in our muscles, tissues, and organs, in effect, rewiring our brains in order to forget. The brain hijacked, the brain was hijacked, but the body did not forget. This is core to understanding. One of the first people to ever study all this was Peter Levine. He wrote Healing the Tiger. You might want to look that up if any of this is resonating with you. It was an important book. There's other people that have written about it since then, but this was the most important information. So anyway, the brain is literally hijacked by the body trying to hide this pain. There's a kind of an analogy too. Excuse me. It's like if your mind goes over and over the same thing and you can't spit out that idea. I mean, it just keeps running through the same thing. That it like a tape recorder. That's a clue that this is what's happened to you. Because it hasn't been, the feelings in the body have not been released. They do eke out, nightmares, avoidance of certain situations. I know a lot of mothers had the hardest time seeing babies afterwards. If they heard a baby cry, or if a friend had a baby, not everybody was like this, but very often it was women experienced this and they didn't understand it anymore, or even if they did, they couldn't do anything about it. So there's a lot of avoiding situations that would remind, because you couldn't do anything about it anyway. And there's triggers. We talked a little, you avoid the triggers if you possibly can, like seeing a baby, or a happy couple, or anything that would remind you of that situation is just avoided. So that takes up a lot of energy to take care of yourself that way. But the key again is that you haven't released these feelings. And maybe you don't even know you can. At some point, wait, one thing I made a note of. Oh, okay, I did that one. Anyway, as at some point, and it's usually when you decide to search, if you decide to search, or you're there as a reunion, you start to become aware of something's wrong. Usually during the search and reunion, but it could be kind of up in an anniversary. Like a lot of people talk about their birthdays meaning nothing. They want to avoid it, go to bed, or forget about it. And the mothers sometimes will say they don't even remember their child's birthday or even the year they're born. That's, I know a lot of adoptees feel very hurt by that, but honestly, that's a sign that that the trauma was that deep that they can't remember. You just blanked out everything around it. And I know that there's been mothers that didn't know within 2 or 3 years when their child was born. So, and also when we find, I have to make an aside, because when I was searching and during before the internet, there were 3 ways that we would be able to contact. If we were searching and we wanted a reunion, you either made a phone call, you wrote a letter, or you knocked on the door. There were just no other choices. You couldn't get on the internet and Google and get on Facebook and see all the pictures and didn't pretty much know anything about the person you were looking for, or very little. And hiding in the bushes was actually frowned upon, at least in my support group, because I thought, you really have to believe in yourself and believe why you need to have this relationship and why they need you in your life. And that took some work to be healing through that idea. And then, so hiding in the bushes was a no-no. But now you can lurk on the internet and get all your answers satisfied. And I thought a lot about this because we had to prepare tremendously to make that phone call or write a letter, or knock on the door. Not too many people did that, but some did. So we had to get to the point where we knew why it was going to be good for us, why it was going to be good for the other, and understand a lot of our feelings and what we'd gone through. And it made it a huge difference when we finally could meet, because then we were prepared. These days, it seems like nobody's really prepared that way. It's like they can get their DNA results and go on Facebook and find out everything about everybody, and then hide behind text and not even meet for years because you're texting, and that has no energy to it. It's not like a letter that you hold or pictures that you hold and discover for the first time. This is why I feel like, the foundation you lay before is really vital. And if it didn't go that way, it's good to look back and see what mistakes might have been made and just correct them. Let's see. And for anybody who this is a little thrown in, but for adoptees who search and find and feel they're rejected, you have to know that you're not being rejected. It's the circumstances, and that for the one found, if it's the adopted person or the mother or father, it's usually a flood of memories come back. It's just, and unexpectedly, because the reunion or the search and being found is completely unexpected. And so instead of having that time that we have to get ready and prepare, they're just in shock, with the flood of feelings and memories coming up, and the body will start releasing it too, not just the mental, emotional memories, but the body too gets in shock. Let's see. This is why you'll find, this is one little example of it, but if a mother is found, and it was particularly back then when you didn't tell anybody, and you were hidden away, so the message was nobody's supposed to know, you understand all that. Well, usually she'll reject because she doesn't want anybody else to find out. She's afraid and doesn't believe and doesn't trust. This is all the buildup of the trauma that keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now she can't trust that her husband or her kids or her family will understand. And because she's back in the past, it's like trauma will throw you right back in the past if it hasn't been resolved, which is usually the case when there's a reunion and somebody's not prepared. Let's see. All of this can feel like a life sentence, but it's not. There's many things that can help. I mean, I'm glad we're being able to get back to support groups. Although personally, I don't agree with most of the support groups on the internet because, hugs doesn't quite do it. You have to be person to person with the people that are working with you and trying to help you. And I found that a lot of support groups, there's an angry support group. So if you're angry, you can be with them. And there's one that's full of sorrow, and others that are rejected. And when you're in the same group with the same people that have the same problems, you don't move on. You get stuck. And you have to be very careful of the support that you get by not being, with people who don't want to keep moving through the healing, and feel righteous about their anger or feel righteous about their victimhood, even though we are righteous. It was very fair to feel angry and, like a victim, but you have to move through it. Then another way, of course, to help with all of this is therapy. And that's great. And it really is essential if you can get a good therapist that really understands you, and understands the issues, but that's sort of hard to find. Also, there's a lot of great books. Now, back then when I was searching, there weren't that many. There were some, and they were really good. But not like these days. Oh my God. I had started a Facebook page called Adoption Books and stopped at 150. There's just so many of them. So you'll find your story somewhere that somebody can understand, that you'll see that somebody understands you. There's journaling that's always recommended. And actually being an activist is a huge thing to do. Helping others help use your anger that way. There's different ways of channeling. But all this helps us to understand our stories, but it does not help us heal completely. I know that it may not even be possible to heal completely, but without this next component that I'm going to tell you about, I think it's going to be much more difficult. So the body, even though you've done therapy and you read all the books and you've gotten in touch with your story, you'll find the body still holds on to those emotional and memories, as they can't be rationalized away. The way you work with the body is not to rationalize it just because you understand in your mind and even in your heart or your emotions. The body still hasn't been dealt with, and it's still protecting you, and it's still holding on to those feelings. The mind-body connection is really very real. And if you don't start to deal with these things, then the body will start to try to get you to. That sounds a little bizarre, but it's really not if you pay attention. You could start to have persistent health problems, or you can feel tremendous fatigue or immune deficiencies, or depression. These things that you don't know where they're coming from or how come you're feeling like that. That's the body talking to you and saying, pay attention. I need you to release these feelings that I've been storing and protecting you from. You can tell I did all of this in California. It's very different in other parts of the country and that kind of thinking, but trust me, I've read enough about it to know that this is a real big thing. I had my own personal example. I'll tell you really quick. The year before I searched for Jack, I had a melanoma on my knee. Now, I had never had a health problem at all, and this was a big shock to have this melanoma. But it was at the very beginning stages, and it was taken care of quickly and easily. And the doctor said, you don't have any other things. You don't have to worry. So when I talked to the social worker and talked to her about Jack, and they said, I'm sorry, even if they were in the other room and both wanted to know each other, we couldn't facilitate that. We could not connect the two of you. And then I was hanging up the phone and I heard, unless there's a health problem. And I squeaked out, does a melanoma count? Like, I was grateful, and I always looked at that as a gift, because otherwise I didn't know what I would have said that would have gotten anybody to, I wouldn't have been able to come up with something, and I wouldn't have been able to make up something. Well, a few years later, after meeting Jack and everything's going great, I exchanged with a friend who did a massage and gave me a massage, and I had done an astrology chart for her, and she was very good, and she's very clairvoyant. So when she was working with me, but I was happy that nothing's wrong, and the sun was shining and everything was great. And then she got over to that knee. And all of a sudden, I started trembling and shaking all over and crying. And I couldn't stop. I just could not stop. And I realized all of a sudden I had this vision of what it was from. And I saw myself lying on the table, giving birth to Jack with my knees up, and asking the anesthesiologist not to increase my anesthesia, which the doctor had asked him to do. And then what I saw with this was, and I remember that part, but I did not remember until this release that he had actually given the sign to boost it to the anesthesiologist. So my knee was holding a lot of that energy, and I was not looking for that. I didn't expect that. I had no idea that was going on, but the trembles and the crying were so real compared to how nice and happy and relaxed I'd been just before. So that's one of the ways I learned that there's some real truth to all of this. So without releasing the body's memories, as much work as we do, otherwise we can't completely heal. When we have to do this is a different process, and it's actually simple. It's much easier than the other work that many of you have probably done. We have to begin to listen to what our body is telling us, and we need to have compassion when we do listen. So the body feels safe when when it is ready to release the trauma. And we have to also trust the process. There's simple things like going for a long walk. Say you go to therapy and something's gotten stirred up, and go for a walk afterwards and try to feel what part of the body is holding on or feels tense or is, in pain in some ways. One of the common things is pain in the chest, breathing problems, because the chest is the area where grief is held. There's different parts of the body where different emotions are held, but this is very common to have grief held in the chest. So you walk through the woods, and the trees are great healers. You just let it go, just release it. You can soak in a tub. This sounds silly, but it's true about energy. You can soak in the tub and imagine all these feelings being released, and let them go down the drain when you're done. You can't do this like do it once and it's done. It's something you kind of consciously do it over time, and pretty soon there's a release of all of the old emotion that create that tape that keeps going over and over, and make you feel like you can't heal. Yoga is another way to do it, because there's different postures that force your body to release energy. And a lot of people that do yoga say that in the beginning, especially, that they burst into tears, at some point. They didn't even understand where that came from. And that's true for breath work, because when we're tense and holding on to things, we don't breathe. We breathe very shallowly, which creates more anxiety. So when you really start to work with somebody that does breath work, that's one thing I didn't do. I did a lot of things, but I didn't do that. But I understood from other people that when you do the breath work, it starts to release these emotions. There are even emotion. I mean, it's not anything that's going to surprise you because you understand your story, but there's also EMDR and tapping. That's kind of a new thing, but it's a lot of people have experienced really great results with that. And again, that'll get you deeper into your memories, deeper into your unconscious. So you remember, I did this EMDR, and I remembered things that I had buried for forever. I mean, I had no idea about. So it's another great way, and it's faster than therapy because you do release it. And this tapping is very similar to EMDR. I also did shamanic healing. I mean, I tried everything, honestly. But this was pretty exciting. I loved the process of getting deeper. There's a quick story. I don't know how am I doing for time? There's a quick story. A woman in my group years ago, I had told the group about the shamanic healing. And this was a woman that people were almost going to break up the group for, because she had so much anger that nobody wanted to come to the group any longer if she came. And I was kind of torn, because I thought everybody's important. We're working on something. But I told her about the shamanic healer because out of desperation, her son hadn't talked to her, even though he lived a mile away, for 3 years, the son that she had given up and found. And so her anger was pushing everybody away. She went to this shaman and saw her anger somehow. I mean, everybody's process is different, but she let it go. I mean, she told me she let it go. She wanted everybody's number and address so she could write them and tell them she was so sorry. She had no idea that she was so bad off. And then 3 days later, her son called her after 3 years. So this release of the feelings is really critical to healing. It's not just hanging on to them, but there's also, I was worried at one point when I was going through all this, well, what if this happens to me again? If I release, then if I forget, then it'll come back, or somebody will take advantage of me again. And a friend of mine explained to me, you think of it as a photograph, and it's a color photograph, and you just drain all the color out of the photograph, and you still have this black and white image. So that's your memory, but it doesn't have all the emotion attached to it. So you can heal and release, and you still are not going to forget. For me, and I think a lot of us, there's a fear that if we let go, what remains? Because we've lived with this for so long, and we've identified probably with whatever it is that, however it affected us. And also for me, when I was thinking about this, I was so afraid to let go of all the pain. I was afraid to let go of my story, even because what would my relationship with Jack be? I mean, we had been in a relationship all along. What would it be like if I let go of this pain? Maybe I wouldn't even care. I mean, I just didn't know what was on the other side. So one day I remembered just saying, okay, let it go. What would be on the other side? And it was almost like a big leap over a chasm. That's how I kind of pictured it. And I found that, wow, love's there. I mean, I can trust that I love him. I can trust that we have a good relationship and we don't need this pain. This was a big thing for me to try. It's kind of hard to describe, but try it if you're in that place like I was. Let's see. How am I doing for time, Betsy? I have how much more time?
You're good. If people have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We don't have any questions yet, so
Okay.
Carol, if you have other things to continue with, be my
Yeah,
guest.
I could have a couple things. So one thing that happens when you release the pain is that you get a better perspective. You have a little greater distance to look at what happened. And so you could see things from a different point of view and from a broader point of view. And it allows our true self, like I started off, how this essential part of us got lost or suppressed. It allows it to start to come back, even for adoptees, for birth parents. That's what the real healing is all about, is to reconnect with yourself. Because really, for the search for the other is a search for yourself. If you understand that, then the reunion will work out much, much better. Since I have a little extra time, I guess I wanted to make a cautionary statement, because usually when you meet, and you can have a wonderful, most of the time it's a euphoric reunion. It's the honeymoon phase. Everything's wonderful. And it really mimics and mirrors the birth again of the baby, because the hormones are released. The oxytocin and all those other great hormones are released at birth. And so when you reunite, those are released again. That's part of one reason why everything's so crazy in the beginning, and it's euphoria. The trick is to realize that that's not going to last. The terrible twos are coming, and people are withdrawing from each other to integrate everything. And that sets panic, that, oh my God, are they gone for good? Are they never going to call back? Am I never going to see them again? I mean, I went through this myself, and I know that feeling. It's just frightening, and it's controlling. And what it does do is control the relationship, because people always talk about walking on eggshells with each other, because they're afraid to saying something wrong, but they're afraid of going back to that space of not knowing each other. But there's also something else going on there. And it's at the euphoria and the connection and everything's going well. You don't have to do any healing. You don't have to do any healing work. You just can enjoy the relationship, but the healing still needs to happen. So actually, when there's a pulling away, that's when you're supposed to start to get to work on yourself. And the more you do that, the less you need the child or the mother to be what you need them to be. That helps you not to have expectations, because expectations make you miss what's really happening. And you don't want to live with that panic. So I always say, when there's a pulling away, get busy healing, get busy getting tuned into yourself. And like I said, like this woman that went to the shaman and got in touch with her anger and realized what was going on. Her son called her in 3 days. I think it was shorter than that even. And she was forever changed when she finally released it. So it's not fun when there's a pulling away, but it is a necessary time. Let's see. So I'll just, because we can't look to this is a big one. We can't look to the relationship to heal us. Which is a normal thing to feel in the beginning, because it does seem like it is healing us, but it really doesn't. And it puts, especially for the adopted person, puts too much on them, because in order for them to be in an adoptive family, a loving one, a wonderful one, it has nothing to do with that. They have to not be themselves. They haven't been mirrored about who they are, and that's really critical. So if then they have to take care of us on top of that, it's too hard. It's too much to expect. And there will be a pulling away if that feeling is too strong of having to feel obligated to take care of you too. So that's important to keep in mind in any stage, even if you've known each other for 20 years. Just pay attention to some of these little things. And I'll just finish this because it sounds like, oh my God, this is too much work, and poor us. Why do we have to go through all this? We didn't want this in the first place. But what I've learned from meeting all the other people that have gone through the journey and come out the other side, they're stronger and than people that, or normal people that don't have to go through what we went through. We seem to have a different perspective on life and a lot more compassion and understanding in a lot of ways. And Kahil Gibran had put this in a nice way I liked. He said, out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive souls are seared with scars. So think about it that way. You are massive souls to go through all this. Anyway, I think I'm done. If there's any questions or comments or disagreements or whatever.
Thank you, Carol. I love that quote that you ended with. So we do have a couple questions coming in here. The first is, what advice for first mothers who struggle with life and struggle even to get help like therapy? What advice do you have? I know you've given some advice, can you boil it down to a place to get started, maybe, is what they're asking.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in. So, and I wanted to mention, I had written a blog that I'll just put it on my Facebook page again, or else you could go to my website, carolschaeferauthor.com. And I have a blog about the same issue that'll kind of help you pull it together again, because, it's a lot easier to read it sometimes than listen and take it all in. Excuse me. So if she doesn't have therapy, is that it? And can't afford therapy, or doesn't have access to therapy and wants to know how she can heal. Is that the question, Betsy?
Or maybe just struggling to even, either get access or get started, invested in it.
Well, and she's a birth mother. I think the thing that's important is to just even start reading. Start slowly, because you don't need to do it all at once. It's not going to work like that anyway. And it's so profound and so powerful and so deeply emotional that you need to just sort of eke it out a little bit. So see what books you're guided to. There's some real good ones out there that will help you understand your feelings and put it all in context for you. And maybe when I wrote The Other Mother, what I needed was what was support group would do. And that would be to be a catalyst, help to the mothers to remember their stories too. Because that's what helped me in support groups, is that I didn't remember anything. And so I would hear somebody remember something that the nuns had done. And I went, oh my God, yes, they did too. So when I wrote The Other Mother, I tried to put a lot of stuff like that in there because it was so helpful to get my memory back. I had, by that time when I started searching, very few memories. And Another way I did it was hypnosis as well. So I would start with books and try to find some good support group in person one if she possibly can. And again, as these feelings start to come up, just start to release them. Yeah, that's probably the basics in the beginning.
Thank you. So several questions have come in. So can you speak to the ways to reach acceptance and peace with the reality of adoption when you're in reunion?
Acceptance and peace.
Right. So when you're in reunion, how do you find
I mean, when
acceptance and peace?
that takes a while.
Big question.
Yeah, it's you mean acceptance that it's not going well, or I mean, I don't know what the whole question is here, but
Just in the reality of adoption, I think the loss and
oh
there's
yeah,
I know from personal experience there's no making up for that lost time, and you have to
no.
come to grips
Oh,
with that
I
and
see the
find a
question,
way.
right. Yeah, it's very, very hard to do that, and it takes a time to have the relationship going, I think, to create your own memories and do things like, it was terrible not to have Christmas with Jack. And so I decided, okay, I'm kind of pagans in a way. And I like the solstice, so we'll get together on the solstice and we'll just do things in a slightly different way, but it'll be our own way. And that was one way to accept it. It was real hard to I mean, I remember when we first met and we had seen each other a few times during this particular week, and my sons Brett and Kip, who I raised, were with me, and we were leaving, and Kip, from the back seat, he was probably 8 years old at the time, he goes, "There goes your son, Mom." And it was like heartbreaking because I felt like Jack needed to just hop in the car with us. He belonged there. And these feelings were very real. Although I overrode them, of course, I didn't act on them. But those kinds of feelings took a long time to just say to myself, this is Jack's life, and he has two families, and this is what his experience was, and that's how I learned to accept it, is just to realize, yeah, this was Jack's life, and I don't want to negate it. I don't want to undermine it. It's his to deal with, and it helped me to start to just really realize that, as much as I'd still would have liked it to be so different, but really, from his point of view, I appreciated the life he had. That
Thank
helped.
you. Yeah, thank you. So we have a question from, I think, probably an adoptive parent, wanting to know if they should wait until their son is 18 to do any DNA things, so DNA testing. He's 16 now. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, it probably depends on all does he want to, is my question. You'd have to find out how he really feels about that, if he's ready. I always feel the earlier the better, because one of the reasons I wanted to meet Jack early, just not just for my need, but his, I felt like the more information he had about himself, the less questions he had about who he was, the better his life was going to be in the future. And the more of a greater foundation he would have as like I said, I met him when he was 19. He wouldn't have all these questions about himself interfering with the life as he goes forward. So I'm pretty sure that if you trust your son is mature enough, and and he wants to do it, I would just let him, because he knows what he needs, and not be afraid of it.
Thank you. And another question, this person is saying that she was 16 when she had her first child that she kept and raised, and then she had a second child at 19 that she placed for adoption. Can you touch more on what she could do with the amount of shame that she feels letting this happen a second time?
Yeah, I know a lot of women that went through the same thing, and it does take a while to work through that shame. You just have to forgive yourself because you probably did the best you could at the time. I don't know, without talking to you, whether you had a lot of people telling you what you should do. You can't keep this child. You have one already, or what the forces were around you. I would examine what those were to see if it seems like even 1920 was young. And here you had a child at 16 that you raised. I feel like it would be good to examine what people were telling you. It'd be very good to forgive yourself. And again, as you feel that shame, just keep releasing it. Just let it go. Just let it go. Because something else will come in, a much more loving feeling for one thing, and it'll probably help the child you raise that you don't carry around the shame. So if you can realize that, you might be able to let go of it a little bit more. You just have to know you did your best, and then there's ways of making up for that. But if you carry the shame all the time, it's going to interfere with the relationship. That helps.
Thank you. Thanks. And then we had a question from someone who I think maybe hasn't read your book yet. They wanted to know more about your reunion with Jack. Did you know his name? How did you find him? I know you have a whole book on that, so
I do. I'll do it quickly though.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, when I went to call Jack after finding him a year, I was lucky back then because sometimes people were searching for 10 years. I talked to his adopted mother first, hence the book, The Other Mother, because I didn't want to. I wanted to talk to Jack, but I was so dying to find out what was going on and so frustrated about the search that when she picked up the phone, I talked to her, and she told me later, she said, I've been in the bed with the flu for about 3 days, and so I was kind of in a weakened state. So you can hear a little ambivalence there, but we actually developed our own relationship. It was difficult sometimes, but it made a big, huge difference because we both wanted to do what Jack wanted. And that was the bottom line. She felt that way too. I think she would have been happy if her curiosity was satisfied and she didn't have to deal with me anymore. But then I put her through a book and a movie. But Jack was number one for both of us, and he wanted the relationship, and he wanted me to be able to be grandma. And he, it was tough with us at first. How can I sum a book up in our life? We've known each other since 84. We've never had a real break. We've had times when Jack didn't call me back for a long time. And then this is how I know that you have to fall back on yourself to heal. And he did say finally, after about 10 years, because I was helping all these people doing all this stuff. And he didn't work on any of his issues. And I was feeling like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? But then he did tell me that he knew he was torturing me by not calling back. And he didn't know why he was doing that. He just had no idea. But he did it. And he was still glad that I called. I had decided to call him because part of what the mothers lose, especially, is their power. You're powerless to keep your child. You're powerless against all the forces against you. So I thought to myself, this not being able to talk is making me feel very powerless. It was something I didn't want to feel. So I thought I'll just leave a message. You know, he doesn't have to call me back. I'll just leave a message. And that worked for both of us because it meant a lot to him that I kept pursuing, but I didn't do it like more than every few weeks. And it also helped me feel like a little bit in control, because that feeling of being out of control is a very deep feeling that you get. So anyway, all this time I am grandma. I actually have just moved to Portsmouth, Virginia, Old Town Portsmouth, and I live a block away from Jack, which I didn't mean to do, but I fell in love with this apartment and this house. And so far he's handling it fine, and we're not abusing the situation. I'm not knocking on the door all the time. But we've gone through everything together, and we're still hanging in, which is great. And I'm grandmother. He's got eight grandchildren now. So I'm great grandmother to 8. And I mean, I'm allowed to be without any problems. So I don't know whether I answered your question. I went all over the place, but okay.
Thank you so much, Carol. So much wonderful information, and everything that you've shared resonated
I
deeply
hope it
with.
helped. Hope it
Yeah.
helped. Yeah.
Resonated deeply with me. My reunion was the same kind of generation as yours, in the mid 80s. And so, I completely understand the things that you're saying.
Oh, good.
So thank you. We want to thank everybody for joining this evening. I did put a brief survey in the chat. We like to know your thoughts about our programs. And so, if you have, if you could take just a few minutes to complete that survey, that would be fantastic. We are a membership organization, and you can check out more information about that on our website. We'd like to thank Carol for volunteering her time with us this evening. And Carol, congratulations on your first Zoom program.
Oh, thank you.
I'm excited that we made that opportunity available, and you said yes and rose to the challenge. So thank you. We have a lot of great programs coming up, so check out the website. Next week we have Gretchen Sisson talking about her book that comes out in February called Relinquished. And so I hope you'll join us then. Thank you so much for coming. And Carol, if you can stay a second.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.